with us. And we've kind of talked with John Martin a little bit, and we've heard this, and we keep hearing the comments made by some of the council members related to the amount of bids that we're receiving, or too often we're getting one bid or two bid, and it doesn't make sense when we're on Mint, when we've got thousands of vendors available to Mint stuff. And I think what we want to express it, it's not Mint. Mint really does open us up to the opportunity for bidders. It's I think what purchasing has done is really looked at the charter language and been strict interpretation, strict enforcement of the charter language when it comes to the bid bonds and the performance bonds. And in most cases, what the feedback that I'm getting from these folks is that when they do that, when they call them, when they talk to a vendor, do we have to put this up? They say yes, we don't get bids from them. So I think traditionally, I can't speak to what issues, but I know traditionally certain things had bid or performance bonds and many things didn't. I think one of the glaring things that we talked about was the idea of bidding out, vehicle maintenance parts, like parts for maintenance. You wouldn't go to O'Reilly's and put a bid out for, I want vehicle maintenance. I need parts so I can get, you supply me parts for vehicle maintenance. They say, well, how much are you going to spend? We said, well, I don't know, we might spend anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000. Well, okay, we need a performance bond then of what, $2,000, $1,000? I mean, they don't even know if they're gonna make a performance bond, so they're not gonna performance bond a situation like that because they don't know if we're actually ever gonna come and spend. So if we look at the traditional list, which we are trying to get away from, the DPW list, which has 100 vendors on it, and they all fall into this pool of potential vendors, or even Parks list, which had pretty much a lot of the same scenarios. Trying to stray away from that, make sure that we get specific purchase orders and approvals for expenditures for certain vendors. But it comes down to how do we maximize the potential of our bids without knowing, I guess, what either the intent or the interpretation is to the charter language, because I think it's been pretty subjective over the years, over the 44 years that we're operating under the charter. So what we were looking to do, and what I asked Mr. Martin to do, was to try to draft some language potentially towards a resolution that potentially each council could set a parameter, an interpretation by which performance and bid bonds would fall under the charter and which ones wouldn't, versus the purchasing department or administration trying to determine, well, this one doesn't need one, and then we bring it to council, and council says, well, did they provide a performance bond? And no, we didn't require them to, and what the charter said, so we didn't want to go that. Let's see if we can narrow those parameters a little bit so that we can maximize, some of our opportunities for bidding on work and recognize more competitive bid process out there. So, John was, we kind of looked at what we wanted to look, and I didn't get an opportunity to connect. But Eric, if you want to throw in anything from what you just handed.
Sure. And I'd like to thank Cindy and Josh for joining me this evening, just so that they could share their stories and if they had any questions. What's really the area of focus is 15.4 and then the letter A, small a. Towards the bottom says no bid shall be received unless accompanied by a bid bond in the sum 5% of the bid, nor shall any contract be entered into unless accompanied by a performance bond and material bond and so on. Now, the term contract pulls back up towards the top of 15.1 and 15.2 where it talks about material purchases. It says no contract shall be entered into the city for the purchase of any materials, tools, apparatus, or any other thing or things, which I can't think of anything that doesn't somehow fall into the definition of anything or things or tools or apparatus. So when I first came on board and Josh shortly thereafter and Cindy, we started putting together the city's policies and procedures that we're using now, which is about the size of a phone book. We looked at this language and we looked at it in its very literal sense. At no point did we ever want to put into place a process that's in violation of the charter or would in any way, shape, or form ever put the city at risk or the elected officials at risk. That's our primary objective. Get the best price possible to do it correctly. what we're finding is I believe if we go way, way back, and it appears as though at some time in the past, I don't know if it's 50s, 60s, 70s, that there was some language where there was a separation of, where there was two different categories, and at some point they took those two categories and combined them and just kind of used this over-sweeping language, which just kind of included everything. I'm sorry? I'm trying to remember, I think that it made, one was more construction.
So one was service.
Project, well, I think it was kind of like construction, project, systems, I'm using those terms loosely, and then there was the everything else category. So professional services, I think, may fit into that first one. But for example, when we got the bid, and Josh was just working on one the other day, what was it, reflectors?
The reflectors.
Reflectors for the roads, road striping, things of that nature. It, literally widgets. We're having these vendors have to supply a 5% bid bond as part of that, because it's obviously over $2,000. They're going, there's nobody else in the industry that requires a 5% bid bond. And our answer on it, I mean, you can ask them, we've all been through it, the three of us, is, yeah, we know, but we're not gonna violate our charter because we all like our jobs. And they said, well, we understand, and then what we end up with is we end up with one or two bids. And we will literally be on the phone begging the vendors, will you please submit a bid, will you please participate, we want to make sure we're getting the best price. And we had one instance lately where the vendor figured out that no one else was bidding, and so from the first effort to the second effort, he bumped it up $6, $7
A unit, yeah.
per unit, knowing that there was nobody else that was gonna be bidding, so he bumped it up per unit. How many units was that, do you remember off the top of your head?
No,
It was thousands. It was DPW, it was red and yellow and blue, and it was reflectors and so on. So now they're starting to play us against ourselves. So, we want to do what's right, but at the same time, we wanna make sure we're doing it within the spirit of what you're expecting, so that what I'm looking for is clarity, so that way, if we go, if I have to come before you, or a department head comes before you and says, this is our recommendation, I don't want that question, was there a bid bond submitted? And us going, well, we didn't think we needed to because there's a breakdown in communication as far as when you're expecting one and when we should be seeking one. So I'm literally, we're coming before you humbly saying, can you help us find out
And
some
I think when they-
definition of how to achieve this?
Eric, I think when you approached with us as well, I mean, obviously, I kept asking and asking him based on some of the comments we hear at council meetings related to, we're repetitively only getting one or two bids and you kind of adds to that. So what I'd ask, I don't know if John, if we want John to try to interpret, into that, any particular, meaning as to whether or not there's